In this lecture, we'll be learning how to create a remote repository in GitHub. We'll also learn how to push our code that is present on the local repository onto the remote repository on GitHub. This is the homepage of GitHub. So this is the URL, github.com. So what you need to do is you need to first sign up for a GitHub account. If you already have one, then it's fine. If not, you can just create an account. And next you need to basically sign into your account. I'm just going to sign in. So when you sign in for the first time, this is how the landing page will look. So in order to create a remote repository, all you need to do is you need to start a new project. So in this project, now you'll have the option to create a new repository. So I'll name this repository as Serenity Tutorial. I'll just give a description. There are two settings here. One is the public setting and one is the private setting. So by default, the setting will be in public because GitHub is a code sharing platform for collaboration as well as for sharing. So whatever projects you are creating on GitHub, they will be available to anyone. So if they have your GitHub ID, they can go and look at your project. The other option is private. So if you choose private, then you'll basically have to pay some amount to GitHub. So when you select a private GitHub account, in this case, the code won't be visible to other people. That is, your repositories are now protected unless you give access. Nobody can come and look at the code. So for our case, we'll just be using the public setting. Ideally, in companies, we won't be actually using the github.com. Rather, the servers will be hosted internally. So only you can access the code within your network and not outside. Skip this particular step and click on Create Repository. And once we do this, we'll get some instructions on how to actually import the local repository into remote. That is how to basically push the code from our local to the GitHub repository. So these are the instructions. So let us now follow this. The first one is basically when you are doing it for the first time. That is when you create a new local repository and when you are trying to basically commit this particular local repository to the GitHub, then you basically need to follow these steps. But in our case, we have already created the local repository and we need to now push this to the remote. So in order to push this to the remote repository, we need to use this particular command, that is git remote add origin, and this is the URL. Let me just copy this. And here, just going to clear this. And if I hit enter, I should have been prompted with the username and password. That is, when you enter this particular command the first time, prompted for the username and password, you provide the same username and password that you used to log into GitHub. So when you hit enter, you will be asked with your username and password. So provide those two details. And once you do that, you will be ready to push your code to the remote repository. So before this recording itself, I had accidentally entered the username and password, and hence it did not prompt me. So just don't be confused. So the first time when it asks you for the username and password, just provide the GitHub username and password. The next step is to basically push the code to the remote repository. So in order to do that, just copy this, git push -u origin master. If I hit enter, it will basically push all the files that are on my local repository to the remote repository. Now if I go back and if I just open this repository, now you can see that the student app project is committed to the remote repository. All the files are present here. These are all the source files. So this is how we basically push all the code that is present in our local repository to the remote repository on GitHub. Now in the first example, what we did was we created the local repository and we pushed all the code into a remote repository. However, there can be cases where you are actually new to the project and you might have to get the project onto your local, or basically clone the remote repository onto your local. So how do we do that? So in order to do that, what you need to do is go to the project, and you'll always have a URL for cloning. So just copy this URL and open up another terminal and create a new directory. So right now I just navigate to the desktop, and here I'm going to create another directory. Just call this as Serenity Remote. And now let me navigate to this directory. So now I'm in the Serenity Remote directory. So what I'm going to do now is I'm basically going to clone this particular project onto this Serenity Remote directory. So all the code files will be downloaded onto this folder. Along with that, the .git folder also will be created. That is the local repository. If I use the clone keyword, or before that we should say git clone, and I just need to provide the URL. Now if I hit enter, see now it's basically cloning this particular project onto this directory. And now if I do ls -al, you can see here that the project is displayed. So let me just navigate here and do an ls -al. So inside this you can see that the .git folder is also present. So we had one more folder. So if you navigate inside this folder, you have the project as well as the local repository. So with this, I think the lectures on Git and GitHub are complete.